all you spooksters out there. Here's a local yokel story about buried treasure right here in Yates County. It's been written about a lot. I've chosen Melanie Zimmer's rendition from Curiosities of the Finger Lakes. In 1787, Jacob Fredenberg left Massachusetts in a hurry, fearing arrest for his participation in Shays' Rebellion. By the way, that was an armed uprising in western Massachusetts to oppose the dire economic conditions at that time. In any case, Fredenberg could not have found a more perfect spot to lay low than on the bank of Keuka Lake, where he took up residence among the Seneca Indians at one of their campgrounds. There, Fredenberg met an old Frenchman living in a small pine grove on the lake bank just west of the channel's entrance. A gunsmith and blacksmith by trade, he earned a living repairing guns and manufacturing tomahawks and spears for the Seneca. Oddly, Fredenberg discovered from a conversation with the Seneca that the blacksmith had secretly buried an enormous sum of French gold near the clump of pines where he made his home. Apparently, the Seneca were not thoroughly fluent in English, but they did describe great wealth and gold and consistently indicated that it could be found to the north. As time went on, Fredenberg learned more about the hidden cache. The story he was told was that a number of years earlier, a group of Frenchmen had left Canada for Fort Duquesne, where they would then travel down the Ohio and Mississippi rivers to their final destination, New Orleans. But the intriguing part of the story is that they were carrying a massive amount of gold. And the Indians suggested that it might have been stolen or intended for some criminal purpose. When the strange travelers arrived, they camped there near the pine grove on the lake and traded with the Indians. Somehow or another, though, the Frenchmen wore out their welcome. And one night, the Seneca staged an ambush and slaughtered them. Most were killed, although a few younger members of the party were adopted into the Seneca community. Nonetheless, the Indians were unable to locate the gold that had been hidden so effectively. Search as they might, they could not find it. Jacob Fredenberg became inclined to believe the story when one day he happened on the old blacksmith examining a map of the area near the pine grove. The map was drawn with the most extraordinary detail, leading Fredenberg to suspect that the old blacksmith was part of the French party that had been massacred, and that he, in fact, knew the location of the buried booty. The blacksmith, though, was tight-lipped about the matter and would reveal nothing to Fredenberg. Jacob Fredenberg remained with the Indians for 3 years before returning to Massachusetts. When he did come back to Keuka Lake, the old Frenchman had vanished. Whether he died or had moved on, the Seneca would never say. John Fredenberg's story of his father Jacob and the buried gold was told and retold by the people of the area. Many a time, treasure hunters would search the shore near Indian pines, but to no avail. Sometimes the searchers were armed with divining rods or accompanied by seers who would use their supernatural abilities to attempt to locate the treasure. However, no one ever found it. It was said that the treasure was guarded by supernatural forces. When anyone came close to locating the stash, the gold would move to a new location and evade discovery. Furthermore, diggers would sometimes accidentally locate crypts rather than gold, causing them to flee in fear of the wrath of ghosts or ghouls. One such instance occurred when George Hetibitl, John Snyder, and David Wagner were searching for the treasure using a divining stone, with Hetibitl's wife acting as seer. Through the stone, they learned the location of the treasure and began to dig. But as they did so, their shovels hit a hollow sounding vault that struck fear into their hearts. They fled without a moment's hesitation when the apparition of a lion sized beast with a long curved tail that extended over its back came for them. Running for their lives, they managed to escape the monster by leaping into the boat, and as all who had come before them, they left empty handed. Another incident has been recounted of a similar apparition. Calvin Carpenter and a group of friends were walking along Plank Road, later known as the trolley line, to the pine clump by the channel late one night. As they walked, they realized that they were being followed by an apparition that looked like a calf, but whose tail curved over its back. They ran for the small footbridge that crossed the channel, and the supernatural beast followed them off to the side at a distance until they reached the footbridge, at which point it vanished. Archaeological evidence confirms that the area known as the Pines was in fact an old Seneca campground. According to George Hetibitl Jr., rifle barrels, pottery fragments, spears, arrowheads, grape shot, iron and stone tomahawks, and brass and copper kettles have all been found at the location. Now, I don't know about you, but perhaps even scarier than the reports of supernatural forces like lion-sized beasts. Even scarier than that is the very true report of the Ku Klux Klan holding meetings from 1927 to 1929 on land adjoining Indian Pines, just across 54A from what used to be Benton Motors, where the Allison Daniel roofing business is. For me, that's even more terrifying than lion-sized beasts with curved tails. Thank you for listening to my story.
I will be reading The Sea Serpent of Seneca Lake from Ghostly Tales of the Finger Lakes by Jules Heller. So far, you've read about secret societies, horrible murders, tragic tales, and ghosts. So it's only right that we end our journey through the Finger Lake with a monster story for the ages, literally. You've made it this far, so we know you've got a brave heart and a strong stomach. But do you have what it takes to face down the sea serpent of Seneca Lake? First, let's go back in time, way back in time. Back to when gigantic glaciers from the last ice age carved the Finger Lakes into the land. There are 11 Finger Lakes, from tiny Canadis Lake all the way up to Great Seneca Lake, which holds half of the water in all the Finger Lakes combined. Now, Seneca Lake is deep, more than 600 feet deep in some places. And when you have a lake that deep, you start wondering what's hiding down there. For example, Scotland's famous Loch Ness is just a wee bit deeper at 745 feet, and we've all heard about the shy beastie that lives there. Close your eyes if you dare, and you can see the sparkling waters of Seneca Lake shimmering in your mind. It's beautiful, giving off a stunning blue and silver radiance in the sunlight, with rolling green hills all around. But mystery lurks in the depths. The Haudenosaunee Native Americans had legends about this lake. They said it was so deep it had no bottom, and that a monster made its home in the dark depths. They treated the lake with great respect, but the white settlers didn't believe the legends. They should have listened. For a time, all was peaceful on the lake. Many towns grew up around it, and it attracted lots of visitors, but nobody remembered the old legends. But on July 14th, 1899, all that changed. Are you still imagining the shining lake? Zoom your mind's eye in just a bit closer until you can see the white shape of a paddle wheel ship steaming its stately way across the water. The ship is the Otetiani, and she carries passengers across the short northern end of the lake. It's late in the day, but the sun is still up. Captain Herendeen is at his post, and it seems like a normal journey. But what's that over there? Look, a large shape in the water. The captain thinks it might be an overturned boat and decides to investigate, hoping to help any survivors he can find. Except it's not an overturned boat, not at all. As the Otetiani paddles closer, the huge shape in the water starts to move. The people on the boat shout as they see a massive triangular head rise from the water at the end of a snake-like neck. The monster is roughly 25 feet long, still much smaller than the Otetiani. And after getting a good look at the ship and its passengers, it turns tail and begins to swim away. After it, Captain Herendeen shouts, and the chase is on. Why chase after this large and potentially dangerous animal? Well, Captain Herendeen knows how skeptical people would be when he told them the story. And if he could just find a way to bring the animal back to port in Geneva, people would believe him. The only way to do that would be to capture it, dead or alive. The Otetiani was just a small paddle wheel ship, but Herendeen reasoned that if they could ram the monster, they might be able to knock it out long enough to haul it to shore. So they chased after their prey. Now, steamships aren't known for speed, but the Otetiani was the fastest of her kind. She was smaller than other steamers and had broken speed records for lake journeys, so her chances against the lake monster weren't bad. Afterward, people gave different accounts of the chase, so I don't know how long it went on or how many times the ship tried to ram the lake monster. But eyewitnesses from the crew and passengers agree that they had crossed paths with the serpent at least once before it dived under the surface. Captain Herendeen thought the creature was gone forever. He turned the ship back toward shore, certain nobody would believe him. But the Otetiani had done more damage than her captain thought, for passengers saw the body of the monster float up in the ship's wake. A large wound on its side showed them that they had indeed been successful in their hunt. The crew rowed their lifeboats over as quickly as they could and tried to get ropes around the body of the serpent, thinking they could tow it back to shore. But it was so heavy, the ropes could not hold it. The lifeless form of the Seneca Lake monster slipped back under the surface one last time, drifting down into the depths, never to be seen again. It's a wild story, almost unbelievable. Nobody has since found anything like the monster the Otetiani chased after. But think about how many witnesses were there that day. Besides the captain, pilot, and crew, there was a whole paddle boat full of people, including a local police commissioner, the president of the Board of Public Works, a geology professor, and the manager of a phone company. How could those prominent people agree on such a bizarre story? Unless it truly happened. Occasional sightings of the Seneca Lake monster have been reported since that July evening in 1899, but nothing up close and nothing physical. Maybe the serpent was the last of its kind, some kind of prehistoric holdout from just after the ancient glaciers carved the lake into the land. Maybe there are more monsters out there, hiding in the deepest parts of the lake. Maybe, just maybe, you'll be the one to find out for sure.
There's a legend in Penyan called The Lady in Granite. And this is a story about a woman who was buried at Lakeview Cemetery. And on her gravestone, a face appeared. And the rumor has it that even if you replace the stone, which apparently has happened, the face reappears. When I was a kid, the story went that if you were to touch the face at the where the nose was, you would get a bloody nose. If you touched the eye, you'd get a black eye. I never went there and looked at it. That's way too scary for me. But years later, I wrote a fictionalized version of this story called The Stone Wife. It first appeared in a literary magazine called Geek Force 5. And I'm going to read it to you tonight. And it is fictional and it is not for the faint of heart. So here we go. Danny watched the rain spill over the edge of the dugout and onto the dirt floor. Saturdays were usually his favorite, but this was the worst, totally beyond boring. He stomped on a puddle and got mud all over his new sneakers and on his legs and knees. That would get Julie mad for sure. Dad had dropped him off at quarter of, just like every Saturday. It was only cloudy then, gray and sticky, but not raining yet. Danny was usually the first one at practice anyway, because Dad had to be at work by 9. The other guys usually started showing up about 10 minutes later. But now Danny's watch said 9:12 and still nobody else was there. They weren't stupid enough to come to practice when it was pouring. He could walk home. It was only 3 blocks up and 2 over. Or he could dig up a quarter and use the old payphone next to the concession stand and see if Julie was back from dropping stupid Evie at the stupid Girl Scouts bake sale down at the PNC. Of course, then Julie would yell at him for ruining her schedule. She loved schedules. She would probably kiss a schedule if she could. He looked around half-heartedly for a quarter or a bunch of nickels or something, but the dugout was empty except for him and the mud puddles and a wadded-up roster from last week's game. The game where Danny walked 6 guys from Morgan's Grocery, but also won the game with a triple in the bottom of the 9th. That had been an awesome game, which of course Dad missed because Julie made him go visit her sister in the hospital. Danny put his glove on his head and leaned back against the wall. Sometimes when you couldn't decide what to do, the best thing was to just sit and wait. Sooner or later, you'd figure out what you were supposed to do. The rain was really starting to come down. Danny could barely see the ads for the Wagner and Long's Cards and Books along the center field fence. Yo! Danny swallowed a shout. He pulled his glove off his head and punched it twice with his fist. Hello? A tall kid with black hair swooped around the corner and slid onto the bench next to Danny. You the only one here? Danny nodded. The kid didn't have a glove or hat or cleats or anything, just blue jeans with holes in the knees and a faded red t-shirt with an Indian chief on it. Pretty crappy day for baseball. Yeah. Danny stuck out his hand, the one without the glove. I'm Danny. Kevin, he said, and pumped Danny's hand up and down once. Nice glove. Thanks. Danny showed Kevin the autographs, Jeter, Jambi, A-Rod. It was his most prized possession, better than the football autographed by Brett Favre or the $100 bill Grandpa had given him on his 10th birthday. Julie had made him put that in the bank anyway. Must be worth something with those, they old. Kevin touched the autographs, black swooshes on the brown leather. His fingers were short and thick like sausages. My dad got them a bunch of years ago. I could sell it online for you. Danny took the glove back and tucked it up under his leg. No thanks, my dad would kill me. Kevin said, okay. They sat in a not too uncomfortable silence for a few minutes while the rain beat down louder on the tin roof. Danny thought about asking Kevin if he had a quarter he could borrow, but just then Kevin said, you want to go over there? He stuck out his sausage pointer finger. The cemetery? Kevin laughed, a sound like coughing in the back of his throat. Yeah? He looked over at Danny and smiled. He was missing 2 teeth on the bottom. If you dare. He waved his hands and made what was probably supposed to be a scary face and said, ooh. Danny laughed. I'm not scared. It's wet though, probably muddy. I'll show you some cool stuff though. Ever see The Stone Wife? Kevin was already up and splashing through the puddles behind home plate. Danny took his cap out of his back pocket and crammed it onto his head. There wasn't any traffic to worry about as they dashed across East Elm. Danny headed toward the main gate, but Kevin grabbed his arm and yanked him to the left. Don't go by the house, we'll get caught. We're not doing anything wrong? Yeah, but we don't need McMinn knowing we're in here. Who's McMinn? Kevin rolled his eyes. The caretaker? They slipped and slid in the wet grass along the wrought iron fence. Just before they reached the side gate, out of view from the caretaker's house, Danny's sneaker slipped in the mud and he went down hard on his right knee. There wasn't too much blood. Kevin waited for him under a big maple with low branches just inside the gate. His black hair was plastered to his forehead and neck. He shook his head like a dog. Danny bent over, his hands planted just above his bloody knee. He took a minute to catch his breath and then said, "Okay, who's the stone wife?" It's not a who, it's a what. Or both, I guess. Kevin took a wrinkled package out of his back pocket. He dug out a clump of pink gum and stuck it in his cheek. Want some? He asked. Danny dug a wad of gum out and stuck it in his cheek, too. Julie hardly ever let them chew gum, especially not the sugary, sticky kind like Big League. He stuck his tongue into the middle of it and blew a giant bubble. Stonewife is a grave, Kevin said. He hunched down, his back against the trunk of the old tree. Up the main hill, about a quarter mile from the road. It's black, about so big. Kevin stretched out his arms as far as they would go. And it's got a face on it. Danny crouched down too. He whispered, "A face?" "Face of the woman who's buried there. Her name is Matilda, and she haunts the grave trying to get back at her husband." Danny looked down at the grass between his feet so Kevin wouldn't see how all the color had drained out of his cheeks. He picked dirt out of the cut on his knee. Kevin said, "He cheated on her and gambled and drank and did all this stuff a husband shouldn't do. So she was dying one day. She was only like 25 or something. And she raised up her finger and pointed at Frank, that was the husband's name, and said, 'You'll never get rid of me. I'll have my eye on you in this life and beyond,' or something like that. And then she died." Kevin stood up so suddenly that Danny gasped, rocked back on his heels, and fell butt first on the soggy ground. Kevin laughed his weird, throaty laugh and helped Danny up. They started up the long sloping hill at an angle. The rain was coming down worse than before, but they were mostly under trees, so just a few fat drops landed on their shoulders. As they walked, Kevin told the rest of the story. Frank, the husband, brought a big old black stone for her gravestone with room enough so that when he died, they could put his name on it too. And they buried her up on the hill, high enough and away from the trees so that she could see clear over to the lake since that was her favorite place. Kevin stopped and looked back at Danny, whose sneakers were slipping on the slick grass. "I'm coming," Danny said. He was panting a little now. Kevin's legs were a lot longer than his. So they bury her, and 3 days later, Frank comes by to leave some flowers by the grave, and when he gets there, he sees the face. Danny shivered and rubbed at the goosebumps that covered his arms. "The face?" His voice went up an octave. Kevin stopped, waited for Danny to catch up, and put a hand on Danny's shoulder. He leaned close so that Danny could smell Kevin's bologna and Dr. Pepper breakfast. Kevin closed his eyes and said the next part in almost a whisper, and also like he was reciting something they'd made him learn in school. A white mark had appeared on the grave in the shape of Matilda's face. Her eyes, her nose, her long hair curled over her shoulder, everything. It hadn't been there the day they buried her, but it was there now. Frank got down on his knee and touched the part of the face that was Matilda's cheek. And that's when it happened. Danny tried to take a step back, but Kevin tightened the grip on his shoulder and leaned in closer. She slapped him. "What? How?" Kevin started walking again, moving quickly around a broken headstone and a half-buried pot of mums. "Well, I don't know exactly how it works, but basically they say that whatever part of the face you touch, you get beat on that same place on your own face. So it's a ghost, a poltergeist or something." "Do you believe in ghosts?" "I don't know. I mean, I've never seen one." "Your folks grow up around here? I bet your dad and his friends came here and tried it." "Tried what?" "Touching the stone. Tons of people come in here to try, but hardly anyone ever gets up the guts to really do it. My dad did once." Kevin was almost running now, and Danny couldn't keep up. He stopped next to a tall grave that looked like the Washington Monument. He cupped his hands around his mouth and called, "What happened?" Kevin turned and jogged back. He wasn't even out of breath. He touched her neck, and then something touched his neck. He said it was like a hand made of ice. It left big purple bruises about the size of a lady's hand. They looked at each other. "You don't believe me?" Do you have a picture or anything? Nah, he was only our age, maybe a little older. They didn't even have cameras then. Danny laughed, but Kevin scowled. Yes, they did. Your dad can't be much older than mine, and he has tons of pictures from when he was a kid. Kevin turned his back. They didn't have a camera. But I believe him. He gets this look in his eyes when he talks about that night. They went in at night. Kevin wheeled around again, smiling this time. The gap in his bottom teeth looked bigger somehow. Yeah, him and his two best friends snuck in a couple of nights before Halloween. They put on all black and snuck in from the entrance over on Rosewood. You know the one I mean? Danny didn't, but he nodded anyway. My dad touched the neck and felt the icy hand on his throat. Then his friend Gene touched the eye and wham, black eye. The other kid was this guy named Mac. He was going to touch the nose, but then McMinn showed up. He was the caretaker even back then. He came running at them with a flashlight and a shovel and chased them out the front gate. Kevin stopped and grinned down at Danny. Wow. Yeah. Kevin stuck his hands into the pockets of his ripped up jeans and said, You ready? It's just over there behind that crypt thingy. Danny did not want to go. He wanted to go back to the dugout and see if any of the guys had shown up, maybe throw a ball around. Or he could just sit in the dugout and work his glove and wait for his dad to show up. What time was it anyway? It might be close to 11 already. And if he wasn't there when dad showed up, everyone would get panicky and Julie would call the cops and Evie would cry and it would be a big mess and it would be all his fault. You're chicken, aren't you? Danny's back stiffened. Am not. Then let's go. They crossed the dirt path and edged around the crypt. The hair on the back of Danny's neck stood up when the back of the stone came into view. It wasn't as big as Kevin said it was, but it was big enough. Jet black, too, slick and shiny from the rain. Kevin walked around to the front of the grave. He spread his feet apart and folded his arms across his chest. Danny looked past him, down the hill and across the ball field to the lake. It was flat and silver and silent. No jet skiers or speedboats on a day like this. Danny took a deep breath and took 5 slow steps closer to Kevin. He closed his eyes, and when he did, Kevin grabbed his shoulders and spun him around so he was facing the grave. Look, come on. Danny peeked. It was a face, a side view of a woman with a pointy chin and long curly hair. She was looking back over her shoulder, the way girls posed for school pictures. There was a dark blotch that was her eye and a little curve that was her ear. Are you sure it wasn't made this way? Positive. It looks like it was. Kevin held up 3 fingers. Scout's honor. Danny laughed and pretended to throw a punch. Yeah, you're a Boy Scout, I bet. Kevin snorted. But you are, right? Danny blushed. My dad's the leader. He bent over to get a better look at the face. Well, okay, it totally looks like a lady's face. Touch it. No way. Come on. You touch it. Danny wasn't sure who started it, but there was a lot of pushing and shoving and some pretty bad swear words. And then Kevin rushed at him and socked him right in the guts with the top of his head. Danny went down in a heap, and before he realized what was happening, his hand flew back and to the left, and he smacked the stone wife right in the mouth. Ow, Danny gasped. He put his hand on his face. Blood. He looked up at Kevin, who was backing away. Did you punch me in the face? I didn't hit you. It's her. Kevin pointed at the stone. Danny backpedaled away from the grave, his butt and sneakers sliding in the mud. Help me up. He wiped at the blood trickling from his split lip. Kevin said, by the way, thanks, and plucked Danny's glove from the grass where it had landed during the fight. Wait, help me up. Give me that back. Kevin backed away, laughing his low, croaky laugh. Stupid kid. Danny grabbed a headstone and pulled himself to his feet. Blood trickled from his lip onto his jersey. Julie was going to be steaming mad about that. Blood was harder to get out even than grass stains, she said. He took a step toward Kevin. His sneaker slipped on the wet grass and he started to go down. He saw it in slow motion. He was going to hit his head on that stumpy grave with the little lamb on the top, and then he was going to pass out and Kevin was going to run off with his glove. And when someone finally found him, probably hours from now, he was going to get spanked and grounded. No doubt about it. A pair of hands grabbed him under the armpits and yanked him back to his feet. Run, a scratchy voice said. Danny didn't have to be told twice. But the voice didn't mean him, because when he went to move, a hand came down on the back of his neck and squeezed. Go now, Kevin. Yes, sir, Kevin said, his voice almost a whisper. All the color had drained from his face. He held up the glove, dark brown now from the rain. Can I keep it? Of course, the scratchy voice said. You've earned it. Now go. That stupid story works every time, Kevin said. He shook his head, water flying from his black hair. A ghost in a grave that hits you back. I can't believe people actually believe it. The hand on Danny's neck squeezed harder. I said, go. Kevin's laugh stopped mid-croak. He turned around in a weird robotic way and ran away down the hill to the main gate. There was hot breath in Danny's ear. The hand on the back of his neck relaxed, but it didn't go away. From the corner of his eye, Danny saw the bright yellow of a raincoat and something silver. A shovel? Mister, that kid took my glove. The silver thing moved. It was definitely a shovel. It was McMinn. It had to be. Of course, a cemetery caretaker would have a shovel. Danny tried to turn around, but the hand on the back of his neck squeezed again. It's just, that's a real special glove. To me, I mean, it's autographed from when Dad went to Yankee Stadium one time. I need to get it back. The hot breath sighed in his ear. You don't need to worry about that. Danny's heart thudded in his chest. He was more scared than he'd ever been, more than when Mom left, more than when he accidentally pushed Evie down the stairs at the cottage and she broke her arm. He tried to take a deep breath, but his lungs were full of cement. He could make a run for it. He was wet and slippery and could just wriggle out of McMinn's hand. Don't make me hurt you, McMinn said. Now walk. The shovel pressed into Danny's back. He walked. They went deeper into the cemetery where the trees were thicker and no one would be able to see them from the road. When they crested the hill, McMinn yanked Danny to a stop. In there, he said, and pointed at a rusty green shed. Mister, please, just let me go. I won't tell anybody, I promise. Get inside and shut your mouth. Danny turned. He wasn't going to go in that shed. If he did, he'd die. McMinn raised the shovel. He swung hard and his boots slipped in the slick grass. He went down, his yellow raincoat flying out behind him. Danny bolted. Down the hill, skidding around the Stonewife, past the Washington Monument. The rain fell harder. Danny blinked furiously to keep the water out of his eyes. He didn't turn when he heard McMinn behind him grunting and coughing, his shovel clanging against the graves. Run, run. Dad wouldn't care about the glove. He would only care that Danny was safe and unhurt. They would file a police report. Maybe they'd never see the glove again. Jeter, Jambi, A-Rod. Jeter, Jambi, A-Rod. Run, run. Danny veered to the right, his feet more sure on the gravel of the driveway. He was sprinting now, his breath hot and tight in his chest. Not far to the gate, first to third, that was all. Then across Elm and into the park. Was that Julie's car down there, parked just outside the concession stand? He screamed her name. Did she look? Did she turn her head? No, it was too far and it was raining too hard. He screamed again, louder. This time she definitely looked. He was at the gate, hands slipping on the wrought iron bars. Locked. Danny! Julie's voice carried to him through the rain. He rattled the bars, his teeth snapping together. Danny! She was mad. He screamed her name again, the loudest scream of his life. His throat felt like fire. But Julie didn't look around again. She was talking to someone, a tall kid with black hair and a red t-shirt and a glove. She would see the glove. She hated baseball, but she knew the glove. They all knew that glove. Even Julie knew Jeter, Jambi, A-Rod. Bad boy, McMinn said. Danny saw the glint of silver as the shovel came down.